And then, great. Now, I was going to say right after that sentence that, Nevitt, you're totally free to take the wheel as you generally do. But if you don't, oh, excellent. I'll take your gesturing as, oh, yeah, seriously, I have got a hit list. I have got some receipts here for the text to answer to. And I'm interested. Let's do it. Okay, so hi. Okay, great. So today's reading is over parts 6 and 7 of the Savages, Barbarians, and Civilized Men section of Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus. Parts 6 and 7 are the Barbarian Despotic Machine and the Barbarian or Imperial Representation. Those are the two sections. And my questions, well, first, I just wanted to make a comment. Really, again, like I said last week, really cool reading, really cool, really compelling, really drew me in at certain points. Certain points I was very skeptical. I was kind of taken aback at certain aspects or certain points in the writing. But I also saw a lot of, these are the sections where I could see, like, Deleuze, D&G are basically offering at certain points in this paper, in this writing, in this part of the text, their alternative responses to questions or problems that are answered by the psychoanalytic school. I don't mean the IPA, like International Psychoanalysis. I mean like Lacanian psychoanalysis, has particular answers to things like, what's the structure of a state, right? And the Hegelo-Lacanian Slovenian answer really is that the state is always failed. It's always a failed state. It's never a rational state. But for D&G, it was more, oh, well, the state organizes and unifies disparate fragments or elements as partial elements or objects that hang off of its body without organs. So it's like a state of partial objects rather than a failed attempt at being a state. So that's just the first example I came out of. But like, I come up with for this, I experienced it a few times throughout this writing. Is D&G now at this point, now that we're about halfway through the book, they're starting to offer up their sort of, hey, now you see all those rules and that sort of system we've been outlining this whole time. This is basically what this system, what it would have to say, basically, about this problem or this concept or whatever. And I'm just remembering that you and I have these filters on. It's so silly. But so moving on, I had a tentative understanding of the first section of the Barbarian Despotic Machine, being this, just talking about the despotic machine, the full body, the territorial lineage, the introduction of money, and the overcoding of fragments in the state. These 5 paralogisms. The first section, I'm not going to say I understood, but I had an understanding of it. I could basically grasp the content. Things got way more confusing as soon as section 7 started, Barbarian and Imperial Representation. I have a bunch of questions. So in my first one, and this is all leading to some later stuff in the later part of that section that's dealing with Nietzsche, but the first thing I think, okay, so Barbarian Imperial Representation. The first thing they say is this, they open up the discussion on double incest, the double incest of overcoding both alliance and filiation through the sister and the mother in exogamous and endogamous marriage. And they say, okay, in imperial formation, incest goes from being this, like we were talking about, where Chase very thoroughly tried to kind of force me to understand the 3-part, the displaced represented to the repressing representation to the, what I mean? They say that, so incest in this imperial formation, I'm trying to basically give context for this question I have. In this imperial formation, incest goes from a displaced represented to the repressing representation, right? Which is what makes incest possible, like theoretically possible within this frame. It overcodes flows. It doesn't liberate them. And we get figures here like Caligula, who engaged in incestuous relations, overcoding, but not liberating flows. And then it gets to this next section, which this is my first question. This is my first question to the room. The primitive territorial sign. And I'm going to see which page exactly, because this should start somewhere around 202. Yeah, 203, in fact. 203, there's a discussion on 202 and 203, starting with the paragraph that says Jacques Derrida at the bottom of 202 and going all the way through it. In that paragraph that starts with Jacques Derrida is correct in saying that every language presupposes a writing system from which it originates, that paragraph puts forward some interesting questions that I think would be a great place, in my opinion. I'd really like if we could answer this or we could talk about this. So what I got is their basic argument in this paragraph on 202 and 203 is the primitive territorial sign. That's the vocab term, right? The primitive territorial sign is this thing, they call it a self-validating desire. Well, okay, what does that mean, right? They clarify. They say it is not a sign of a sign, or getting caught in the combinatorial matrices of psychoanalysis. It's not a sign of a sign or a signifier signing whatever, and it's not a desire of desire. It's a territorial, or no, it's an imperial representation, or sorry, no, it's a territorial representation, as opposed to this imperial representation that starts to inject these thoughts that we have, this sign of a sign, desire of desire, yada yada yada. Primitive territoriality, and the primitive territorial sign, and when they say this sign, I guess they're talking about the graphic machine performing these hieroglyphs and phonemes. This territorial sign, as opposed to the imperial sign that they're trying to get to later, this primitive territorial sign, it's a self-validating desire, not a sign of a sign, and it's not a desire of a desire. Well, here it was my first, I was like, what? I just totally didn't understand this, because here was my first thought is, can't it be a desire for a desire? Couldn't it be possible that even in a primitive territorial social landscape, and maybe I'm totally misunderstanding the picture that they're illustrating here, but here's my thinking. They're arguing that a primitive territorial sign, meaning pre-imperial, before the imperial apparatus or machine, and I don't mean pre or before in a literally temporal sense, but whatever. This territorial sign, this primitive territorial sign, it's not a sign of a sign or a desire for desire. It's not this infinitely reflexive thing. It's different. It's immediate. It's production and not expression. It's self-validating. That's what they mean, right? Well, my question is, if all of the primitive territorial signs, if primitive territorial signs are not signs of signs or desires for desire, that rubs me the wrong way. That strikes me as being absurd. I mean, can't primitive signs or desires be signs of signs or desires for desires? What about okay, let's say this. Let's say you have a primitive subject or a subject amidst the primitive territorial signing system. Let's say in Sumeria or wherever, you have a primitive territorial subject and in a system of primitive territorial signs and signage, and they say, I hate my life and wish I was dead. And I see my neighbor, Grob or Oog or something, and he seems to love his life and is happy-go-lucky and blah, 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 right? Ooh, I wish that I wished as he does. You know what I mean? Or that's a desire for desire. That's a desire for desire. That's him saying, I wish that, or I desire to desire as he does, as that other person does, because I personally am depressed and miserable. This other guy has some zest, and his wife and him have passionate sexual relations, and his children love him, and he's successful at work, and blah, 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 because he's got this zest, he's got this lust for life, and I don't. What the fuck, right? This dissatisfaction, this inadequacy, this feeling of envy. And that's the next thing, envy. Let's say the king or the chief has pigs and gold and emeralds or a nice ziggurat to sit in, right? Wouldn't it be reasonable for a subject such as myself, a primitive subject, to say, I wish I lived in a ziggurat? And then let's say Chase, or the primitive version of Chase, came up to me and said, well, you only wish for that ziggurat because big man up there has one. Your desires have already been overcoded. And I was like, well, I don't care. I want a big ziggurat. What do you want? So my desire can not only be for another's desire, but also for the desires of another, right? I can want their wanting. I can want, well, sure, ziggurats, I guess, imply an imperial. Well, that's actually an interesting, maybe you're kind of getting into something. I don't know, because maybe I'm thinking about it in this sort of imperial frame, and I'm not actually thinking about it territorially. Maybe that's why, but that's my question is, wouldn't it be possible, theoretically, I guess, for a primitive territorial experience and sign to be connected to what we would call signs of signs or desires of desires through things like what we call this like depression or envy, meaning I want what that guy has. I want to want life, or I want what that guy has only because he wants it. Fuck him. You know, like, is that, or is this just a totally wrong-headed way to ask this question? Like, I don't know, like this, that to me was the first moment in the text where I was confused, was like, it just, I didn't understand, I guess, what they were getting at. And I see some posts in the text, but I'm just gonna, that's it. That's my question right now. And I don't know, what do you guys think about that? I don't know.
Yeah, so this part about you know, Derrida and these, so it's this distinction between these two different systems of inscription, where you got, yeah, the primitive territorial sign, and then you got the imperial despotic signifier. Are you taking off your clothes there? Oh, okay, there you go. All right, yeah. There's almost some desire going on there. Just saying, but yeah, okay, yeah. This part is was rather difficult for me because there's just something about, I think, the word signifier that it just confuses me, even though it's not really that confusing. But I think what you're saying, though, I think what they're kind of counter to what you're asking would be that it's just something too concrete to have a kind of abstraction where you could have that reflexive quality that you're talking about. And it just has to do with the kind of nature of these rituals that go on with the primitive territorial coding, where you're going to have something like you know, marking on a body in a ritual combined with some kind of invocation, kind of putting things together while they're still independent in a relative manner. But it'll be something like, okay, you know, the example they give in the earlier section is that one ritual where it's some kind of marking of a young woman to show fertility, I believe. And it's something like that, that codes that, okay, she's part of the tribe and her womb is, you know, part, I think it's some kind of like a marriage fertility kind of thing. So it's saying, okay, this woman's womb, you know, can now go over to this location. It's kind of, you know, selecting where flows go, where they don't, but it's something that, so one of the distinctions they make is, you know, a system of connotation and demarcation versus the whole signifier thing, signification. Okay, so demarcation, I think some of the stuff they talk about with, like, where they're talking about Lyotard and all this stuff was, I don't understand that completely, but what I get is designation, it's talking about things, you know, a word can mean a thing, and that's just simply, it's something just simple and concrete like that. So it's not a sign or a signifier that's kind of pointing to yet another signifier in a chain. Instead, it's something that is more kind of finite. So they talk about these finite blocks, and I think that's what is composed there, is that you've got some kind of a relation going on with, you know, the voice, the hand and the graphics, the marking on the body, and then the eye that extracts the surplus value of pleasure from these rituals. And that's usually connected with, you know, these village elders who will kind of like watch these things go on. But it's supposed to be something more concrete like that, where it's demarcating these things in a kind of fixed, because they talk about it as mobile blocks, which becomes kind of important because that's not what is going on with the imperial kind of system of inscription. But I think that's why it just is not capable of having that level of abstraction. And I think they're going to see that as something that occurs with that imperial system that overcodes those things. So I mean, it's kind of a silly kind of counter argument or whatever, but well, yeah, like, so some of the examples you gave are something that would just kind of come about not with the primitive territorial tribal society generally, I think. I mean, well, you probably read in the chat. So you mentioned, like, okay, the chief, what if somebody is like envious of this? I think that's definitely true, that obviously you'll get some kind of envy like that, but I think the thing is that that's not what is kind of coded into these systems. Instead, that would be something that is kind of burned out of people with these rituals. And that, okay, so this is kind of like a training, like a social training in society, where reactive forces are going to be kind of force will be applied to them in the primitive territorial circuit in order to kind of suppress those reactive forces, like a kind of envy. And instead it kind of codes a very, very strong collective sense of identity. Although identity, those in Guattari wouldn't want to talk about that way, but usually when you see the pain and the memory that goes along with it, what is it usually for? It kind of, it's not a kind of, you know, totally repressive state in the way that we would think of it as like modern political oppression or whatnot. Instead, it's something that kind of really tunes people into the group in a more concrete way. And I think because of that, you're not going to have, I mean, yeah, you have envy, you have things like this, but it's not going to be so much part of what is determinate about this social formation and the way that it actually codes it and scripts all these things. So what they're saying is that with the Imperial Barbarian Despotic thing, that, okay, so now desire is no longer, so desire before, it's for the most part, they describe it as, you know, these collective organs. That's what we really want to desire, is, you know, we all get to share like the village womb and the village phallus and all these great things. That's kind of what desire is about. That's the object of desire. Where in the Imperial Barbarian blah blah blah, that is going to be, okay, now it's suddenly detached from those kind of somewhat more concrete or at least lived situations where it's going to be, at least about local interaction of some type, where now it's about, okay, I live under this society where they have some kind of law, and I've got to know what this law is in order, there's, a threat of dying if I don't understand what is going on here. So desire becomes something very much detached from that. And I think that's where you get something, you get these different formations that would correspond more with the kind of thing that you're talking about as these weird kind of reflexive properties within desire and whatnot. At least I think that'd be something kind of like what they would say to that. Yeah, I'll leave that there.
Yeah, so okay, now this is good because it leads into my next question and then the next question. It's just these which I mean, I don't want to just keep berating this everybody in this text with my thoughts and theories, but I want to just say in response to your response, first off, so the basic, I'm just going to try and restate what you said, see if maybe I am misinterpreting it, and it's that, well, there can be envy and there can be depression, and these, of course there can be these affectations that I'm describing, but it's such that those affects are not necessarily coded into the system as it stands in this form as primitive territoriality. Those feelings, like you said, are, in fact, as a point of fact, are often burned out of people. It's much less about those features and facets of human experience as engines of ingenuity or what's the word that people, innovation, like people valorize them now, in the imperial form and beyond. It's like, oh, well, of course you'd want to be envious or something, of course I'm envious, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, I like good stuff and I want to, and that's whoa, if people were angels, a primitive territorial sign would work, but I want to get rich, of course. And so there's like I'm saying, it's in the system. It's not this bizarre, or not maybe bizarre, but this sort of contingent or more I don't know if there's a gradation of more or less contingent, but this utterly contingent aspect, rather than this element of the structure that can illuminate more about the mechanism at hand. Like so it's not so much that this envy and this depression are what is determinate about the social code. The thing that's determinate about this, yes, they exist, of course, but there's a difference between talking about, okay, this is an attempt to rephrase it. There's a difference between talking about the possibilities of primitive experience. There's a big difference between talking about two things: the open possibilities of primitive experience versus the primitive territorial sign and its basic function. The basic function and structure of the primitive territorial sign and its relation to the imperial sign or to the universal history that we're trying to deploy. We're trying to deploy something of a history right now. And in that exercise, we're talking about this thing called the primitive territorial sign. And the legitimacy of the analysis of the primitive territorial sign is not neutered or in any way weakened or lessened by the kind of obvious observation that there are, of course, present feelings, experiences, affects, deployments of symbols. Of course, there are deployments of symbols in that direction. That's part of why it developed into such a predominant mode afterward anyway. It's because these things are present. There's this looming limit, that's of course there would be things like envy and depression and desire and blah, 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 this sort of impulse that I'm talking about, this trajectory into this reflexivity, this sort of psychoanalytic reflexivity. Of course, there's that trajectory that history says so. right? Okay, and if that's accurate at all, I'm with you there. I'm with that. And moving on from it, there's a lot of other weird stuff that goes on in the discussion of the imperial system. So you go from the primitive territorial sign, talk about territorial representation. Now the voice graph I use. So territorial representation is all about the voice graph I, the magic triangle, use and function, incest failing, right? Incest fails, use and function rule. Imperial representation then takes the scene, sweeps on to the scene and says, now we've got this like writing as a loss of sight. The triangle is no longer a magic triangle. It's actually the base of a pyramid, a hierarchical pyramid for social structuring. A mute voice from on high. I really liked that. I really liked the mute voice from on high. It's super cool. Because it's a thing in Warhammer. Never mind. But then, moving on, think about, okay, so now they're like, oh, okay, whoa, we're talking about this imperial representation, we're talking about deterritorialized signs, the despotic signifier, which obviously is the master signifier. Linguistics are constituted by a transcendence, even if it's a transcendent emptiness, whatever. Then they get into the, okay, now let's see, what is this? Page 209 is my next big hiccup in the writing. And now actually, before I do, I'm going to read really quickly. What is Nietzsche says in obedience. A record of what a particular group needed to come into establish some kind of order which people were no longer allowed to act on, whatever drives us out. I think that is a good, so Nietzsche, and this is part of why they're referencing Nietzsche so much. Thank you, Nevitt, is that like Nietzsche was kind of on the ball about it. He knew, he was kind of packaging this analysis of primitivism or primitive life in this way that I think kind of gels with what Deleuze and Guattari are saying so far. That's good. I'm with you. But then, okay, back to this. 209, master signifier. 209. In the first and second paragraph, because those are the only paragraphs, on 209, they say the despotic signifier has the effect of overcoding of the territorial chain. The signified is precisely the effect of the signifier and not what it represents or what it designates, right? And I agree. I think this is a legitimate analysis of the Lacanian notion of the signifier, or the psychoanalytic notion of the signifier. The signified is just an effect of that signifier, okay? So basically, if I could try and encapsulate this in my reading, it'd be the master signifier does two things, basically, two big things. It does a lot of stuff, but it does two big things. It bars meaning and it distributes lack. Those would be the two big things I'd say it does, that they're talking about right here. It bars us from meaning, it distributes lack. It says the signified, the meaning, the good stuff, the meat, the gold, the wealth of your inner experience, the stuff that signs seem to be referring to, all that shit, that's just the signified. And the signified is just an effect of the signifier. So guess what? We're stuck here with signifiers. So the master signifier is saying, no meaning for you. Tut, tut. No, no, no. You stop at the limit. The limit is the signifier. All right. The signifier is the limit. Not the limit, but it's the whole field is signifiers. Oh my God. And it distributes lack. It distributes this universal lack of capacity to approach the signified. Sure. And it makes it makes the signifier now, instead of incest or whatever, the signifier itself is repressing representation. It's the repressing representation. The signifier is the repressing representation. The signified is just an effect of that repressing representation. Okay, well, here's my big question. And it's, so, okay, if I were to try and level with them, I would say, okay, fellas, the signifier represses. Sure, signifier represses. I get it. Signifier, it does that. I agree. I feel repressed by signifiers plenty. I get repressed as much as the next guy. But what do we do then? If the signifier is so repressive, and I agree, don't worry, what should we do? What choice do we have? Is there any alternative? Is there any option other than these repressive signifiers? What the hell am I, and furthermore, Like so what should we do, or what can we even do, really? What can we do about these repressive signifiers, or the repressive action of these signifiers? And this is a further thing. A big motivator, motivator for Freud and Lacan's insistence on the repressive mechanism of signification, the repressive apparatus, or the repressive aspect, is this reference to this thing they called primordial repression. Freud had this vocab term, primordial repression. And the basic meaning of primordial repression, right, is, I mean, at least as I understand it, is something is always primordially repressed. You try to take you have the form, this box, and you try to reach in like taking a rabbit out of a hat. And you try to pull out the content. You try to explicate the content from the form. You say, okay, I'm going to reach in here in your mind, rip out this stuff, or I'm going to reach into this form, like motherhood or some bullshit, and you try to pull out the content, the stuff, the further explication or understanding. But there's always going to be something that is primordially repressed. You can never fully burp up all the content of the form. There's always going to be something primordially repressed, functionally, formally. There's always going to be, and this is, basic, anybody can, there's always going to be a gap between form and content. Sure. I mean, I guess maybe unless you're Plato, I don't know who would say, whatever. But so Freud and Lacan are basically advocating for this idea that there's always this repression. There's always this primordial repression. And the signifier signified thing, yes, it's repressive, but I mean, it's like, tough luck, tough titties, said the kitty, like, it's just, that's it, buddy. It's going to repress you. Sorry. I don't know. It sucks. Right. And that I feel is Lacan's attitude towards a lot of this. Is just like, I know you would think it sucks. I agree. But I wish I could agree. I feel like Lacan's response to a lot of this would be, is just like, I wish there was an alternative, but we are fucked. We are repressed. We are primordially repressed. And our signification basically is reflective of that constant primordial repression as a fundamental constitutive feature of any sort of sign, signifier, symbol, whatever. There will always be a primordial repression. And so my question is, I guess the signifier represses, but what do we do about that? Or what could we have done otherwise? And in fact, and now this is getting into what Chase just posted in the chat, is, do they agree? Would they agree that something is always missing? That there's always something, they probably might not call it primordially repressed, but something missing from explication of any sort of form. You know what I'm saying? That's my question, is, could we do otherwise? Because Freud and Lacan would say, no, we can't, you're fucked. And the signs, they're the signifiers, they repress because it's repressed. Sorry. But D&G seemed to take issue with that. Say, well, the signifier is repressive. Well, repressive of what? Something that wouldn't be repressed otherwise? Or, and if not, who cares? You know what I'm saying? Okay, that's it.
I'll admit I'm not exactly sure how to answer that, but I'll just say, okay, well, I was thinking my strategy was going to be to bring up all the 1,000 Plateaus stuff, but then I just realized, like, I should actually not do that, because that's always a bad idea. Not always, but generally. Maybe this is it right here. We're stuck in this, we're in the signifying chain. How do we close, or I don't even know what terms to use. How do we close the signifying chain? I don't know. In terms of, okay, we've got this despotic, signifier going on, and there's a form of kind of repression because of that. Well, so they think that, so all these different social formations, so they all kind of coexist. So we're living in the social formation of capitalism. I hope that's not a huge surprise to anyone. So it's a little different, although we still have all these aspects of these previous, well, it's not even really actually correct to say previous because they're coexisting. So we still do have to deal with these things, and you know, they're in a different state now. But you've got okay, so a despotic signifier, that's going to be something like law, I think, is somewhat of a more concrete example they give. So it'd be something like, okay, you get a law, that's kind of a signifier. It's not kind of demarcating anything specific. And then there's the whole kind of question that, you know, this is what we've got lawyers for, you know, God bless them. They tell us, you know, what does this mean? They give certain interpretations, but then they argue with each other about, you know, what this means and whatnot. So I think it's still definitely something going on in our society, but I think to a certain degree, they think that it's kind of a somewhat of a false thing, that, you know, that all language, you know, kind of operates like this or whatnot, and that we're kind of stuck in that. I think they think that there's other ways of going about communicating and existing and doing fun stuff. What exactly that is, it's kind of hard to give some kind of a concrete, you know, example of that, because it's so, you know, it's kind of an abstract question that demands something concrete as an answer. You know, it's like, well, what does Guattari do on like a, you know, like a Friday night? What did he do? I don't know. I mean, I've actually heard he was kind of an asshole, like his family, which it kind of makes sense, right? You know, like Anti-Oedipus, like, I don't know. He's supposedly like just like left his wife and like with all these kids and all this stuff. I don't know. That's stupid though. But who knows? What did Guattari like to do? I don't know. How, you know, how did he get his rocks off? I don't know. Deleuze seemed to be happy just kind of like reading Spinoza and Bergson, like, and sitting at his house and like probably listening to classical music and drinking wine and probably wearing a beret just like this too. And he smoked a lot until and then his like lungs like collapsed and he got tuberculosis and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. So that's basically not an answer at all. But I feel that is somehow appropriate in a kind of meta way. So yeah, okay, but so I have a kind of a general question, just kind of like open it up. So I'm kind of curious about, so when I first kind of read through this, especially this stuff about all these signifiers and whatnot, so I could kind of tell the Lacan references, you know, the desire, the voice on high, and the despotic signifier and all this stuff, but there's still parts of it that, and I could tell, yeah, what is the other one, like the metaphor metonymy kind of thing. But there's still a lot of that just because I don't know Lacan that well, I don't know Derrida that well, that I found that difficult to really kind of grasp exactly what was going on, especially because they they go through so much detail about it. But I'm kind of curious about what was everyone else's experience of reading this like, and what were the aspects that stumped you? That I'm kind of curious about other people's just experience of reading this, the delirium of it and whatnot.
I kind of am confused about what they meant. Like, incest is now possible. Like, I'm kind of assuming they didn't mean that literally. They meant more of like the like filiative or and alliance, as far as like the symbolic mother and sister or whatever they would call it. I just wasn't sure because like in a secondary reading, it said something about like incest is like technically impossible because you need like a name and a person, and I didn't understand the language.
Oh yeah, so for that, I think yeah, so it's technically impossible in the primitive territorial, although, so that's the thing is where, okay, it's either you can do incest, but it's not with the people that you're doing incest with. So it's not really incest because the people kind of demarcating that it would be incest, like family members, that doesn't really exist, because that requires some kind of like a social coding and filiation of saying this person is that person, that person is that person. You know, they're family members. That's prohibited because we need alliances with these other tribes, and we're actually, you know, you can't just go off, you know, marrying anyone and whatnot. You know, we got stuff to do, you know. But I think so that's that primitive territorial. But then, okay, so then the Imperial barbarian, so yeah, it's kind of, okay, there's this double incest thing going on. Sounds strange. It is strange, but yeah, so that is supposed to be mainly symbolic or figurative or whatnot. Although I believe they say that it can still be literal. It's still, because of the thing about it, I mean, if you're the fucking king, you know, you're the despot. If you really want to have incest, you want to like bang your sister or whatever, like, who's going to stop you? If you're really the despot, like, maybe it's something just that simple. And you know, I think it's mainly about the symbolic idea that, okay, yeah, what they're talking about, the sister has to do with alliances, because that's normally, okay, the alliance system and the territorial, that is to do with the way that, you know, siblings would be kind of like sequestered off into other tribes, these extended family groups, or actually it's kind of like it's exogamous. Did I say that right? Whatever. So that's why that has to do with it. But the fact that the despot, you know, figuratively or possibly literally marries his sister, that has to do with it's just kind of a way of saying that, okay, the despot now kind of takes over that alliance system. It's no longer really exogamous anymore. It's no longer about, you know, these different tribes kind of connecting with each other. The system of debt and obligation of, you know, I'm giving you my sister, my niece, whatever. Now there's an obligation. Mobile blocks of debt are flowing. Instead, it's all the despot kind of, it all goes back to him, in the sense that he's now the source of all this alliance system and the filiation. So the sisters is the alliance, and the mother has to do with the going back to the tribe, and the way that is also overcoded. So it's kind of combining this alliance and filiation, which were more independent in the territorial. So yeah, the mother is just kind of like, okay, that's the mother of the tribe, marrying the mother, hopefully figuratively. That has to do with the fact that the despot now is kind of overcoding that filiation system as well. And I think that also, that's, you know, okay, well, he's the kind of mythical father figure. He's the paternal father figure of everything in society. He's the, you know, the quasi cause that pretends to be the source of all production and all the generation of all the peoples and whatnot. So I think that's kind of what it's like. But yeah, you could still have you know, like Game of Thrones kind of stuff, you know, that was kind of a little different, because I think that was kind of like that was much more Oedipal. It was kind of secret and whatnot. It wasn't really Oedipal, it was its sister, I guess. I don't really know. Whatever. Game of Thrones would be interesting to see an analysis of that. I don't know if anybody is into Dune, the books more so or not, but I've listened to this podcast, which actually I recommend it a lot. Is they have a reading of Anti-Oedipus. So it's called Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour. But I was listening to one of the podcasts, and one of the hosts just frequently cites Dune. So I was thinking, if somebody really knew Dune really well, this would probably be pretty cool, pretty helpful. But unfortunately, I read half the first book, and that was many, many years ago. So I don't know shit. But anyways, yeah, that's my attempted answer.
Well, okay. Now I will say this. I know nothing about Dune, and I know actually I know two things, three things actually. There's a big worm, and there's a guy named Paul Atreides, and there's another guy named Duncan Idaho. Those are the three things I know about that intellectual property. And I don't actually know if it's any good, but I know actually, now you're talking about, a lot of people talked about a lot of weird mother-son sensitivity going on in the basic plot of that story, and represented once again on the silver screen in the recent Timothée Chalamet featuring rendition of the Dune story. People were weirded out by that. You know, I think that's interesting that, like, you know, because you would have, and this is just a side, this is a non sequitur, but I just love, you ever seen Zizek talking about his Criterion like closet collection, like his like favorite movies, and it's like he pulls out a movie, it's called The Murmur of the Heart, you know, The Murmur of the Heart from 1971. It's like, this is one of those sensitive old, you know, sweet little French movies where you have a mother and son with a dirty little incestuous secret, and it's all nice and pillowy and beautiful and flower. I like this. This is nice. This is heartwarming. I like this. And then he puts it away without any. And it's like, yeah, there was a time and a place, it seems, but no, that's a thing about, I think, contemporary political, or not political, popular culture, is just like, incest is like a way more ultimate taboo in a way now. It's like there's certain elements in the sort of, you know, free libertine, do what you want with your sexuality thing kind of era. There's some interesting moves being made around the topics of like the innocence of children. That's a big thing Zizek actually focuses on. Is like, why do we think children are innocent? They're stupid and evil. And like, and Freud is universally hated because he says he dared to say that maybe a child could be gross and like not innocent and like kind of perverse? Like, could a child be perverse and malicious, or like, warped in some sort of way that we might not like for some reason? Like, and people were like, no, 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 you're not going to touch a hair on their pretty blonde heads or whatever, and you're not going to fuck them either, and they don't want to fuck, they don't want to fuck anything, and you don't want to fuck them, and you don't want to fuck these other people too. Any of this? No, no fucking way, But then at the same time, I see on TikTok a lot of I waste a large amount of time on TikTok. Like I recently got a new high score, 25% uptime on my screen time per day. I'm up to 5 hours a day on my phone. Isn't that impressive? Isn't that great? And I was told, apparently, yeah, that it was just, I was looking at TikTok and like, it's very frequent that people will be like, oh, literally, I saw a post or somebody was like, do you guys ever look at, it's like some woman who's like, you ever look at your boyfriend sort of like wondering, like, wouldn't they be such a great son? Like, wouldn't it be so great to be their mother? Like, they're just such a good boy. And like, they're so respectful and kind and nice. Isn't that so sweet? And then everybody I'll give it to you. But Chase just asked my TikTok for that. But like everybody in the comments is like, Freud never took an L in his life and he never will. He was right. He was fucking right about everything. And like all you people calling your partners daddy, it's just another 3-pointer. That's another 3-pointer for psychoanalysis from 100 years ago. They were fucking on it, dude. You called him stupid, but sorry, that's my polemic against the youth. But my more relevant, now just going on this incest as possible versus impossible thing. By the way, I'm just going to type this really quick. It's that. Anyway, the thing about like incest being possible versus impossible, I thought that was interesting. Given, my experience, by the way, is a general overview for you, Chase. Like I thought I had a pretty okay grasp of what was going on until like page like 20, like that page I talked about, that 209, 210, like all the sections that Nevitt pointed to as having heavy reference to the genealogy of morality. I'd never read that text. I've never read the genealogy of morality outside of small essays that I've been linked to in places like the Discord. I've never read the whole body of that, but I've wanted to. And that combined with a lot of their very niche references to Lacanian discourse and analysis. Yeah, it was hard. It was dense. All the discussion about latency and the death instinct, I thought, are they talking about the death drive? Are they talking about Freud's death drive here? And if they are, this is weird. And yeah, Nietzsche references. Niche reference. Yeah, it's pretty funny. But I was like, I was just twisted up. It was all weird. And so I thought I had a good grasp on it until about 3/4 of the way through the reading. And then I was like getting mad. I was like, what the fuck? I thought part of me was getting mad because it was a much bigger section of text than we had from other, like when I say much bigger, I mean like 5 extra pages. But it was like, I literally got to a point, at some point in like the 3/4 mark, I was just like, why are you saying this? Who gives a fuck? Shut up. Like, just, okay, maybe it's designating, whatever, fuck you. Just shut up. Like, I got like a mad at the text, which happened a lot reading Hegel. Every couple, I was just like, whatever, you bitch, you old dumbass, like whatever. Like, I don't care about these things. Like so that was my experience, which is not to say it wasn't good. It was great. But my point is, in my confusion and in my frustration and whatever, I tried to cobble together an analysis. And my reading of it's possible versus impossible thing. It's like Aiden. It's like you were putting forward like the symbolic thing. That was the thing that I thought was like at the core, was like it's symbolically possible versus symbolically impossible. Like it's symbolically impossible because once you fuck your mother, she isn't symbolically your mother anymore, right? And if you fuck your, same deal. And once you get into this imperial formation, those symbolic roles or forms take on a new meaning that can include incestuous relation. It doesn't preclude incest anymore. But then this brings up a weird set of questions, right? Is in a good way to, I think, tackle this question, to really keep carrying the torch of the question that was just asked about the possibility versus impossibility of incest. It would be on 210. I want to just move to 210 real quick because I had this question. They talk about simulation. This was weird to me. This was a point where I was really confused with simulation, because I've had questions about simulation before. But okay, so they say this. This is what I understand them as saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like they're saying, so signification, the system of signification, is basically a system of simulation. And this system of simulation, what it does is it appropriates reality in overcoding. And okay, I've even got in the first paragraph of page 210, middle of the paragraph, it says, excuse me, simulation does not replace reality. It is not an equivalent that stands for reality, but rather it appropriates reality in the operation of despotic overcoding. It produces reality on the new full body that replaces the earth. Okay, that's the sentence that really weirded me out. Simulation does not replace reality. It is not an equivalent that stands for reality, but rather it appropriates reality. Okay, so it appropriates reality and overcoding. It makes incest possible. This system of signification, it makes incest possible as a simulation of something else. That's kind of this weird little parenthetical note they make, is like, incest is possible in this sort of simulated way, whoa, we're in this realm of simulation, signs, distance. This is what Nevitt was talking about in the chat when he was like, look, it seems like, just to reference Nevitt's answer to my previous question where I was like, why do they not like signifiers? Nevitt offered the response in text, was like, it seems like they're frustrated with this moving away from desiring machines. And the despotic signifier seems to operate on distancing itself from desiring machines. And he said, maybe through some sort of nomadic something, we might be able to get some sort of closer something. And I agree. I totally agree. So through some sort of nomadic enterprise or nomadism, we could get closer in some way to the desiring machines, or to the machinic productive stuff. And I think that's fine, right? Well, so they're talking about this system of simulation and signs as this big symptom. This, we're moving away from the desiring machines. Oh my God, oh shit. The desperate tries to reconstitute the full body on itself. People and things get representations or representatives. And this brings me all the way back to a conversation Chase and I had literally like 4 years ago about like his conceptual problems with representative democracy. It was like, this was the first time that finally made sense. It was like, oh, a representative kind of sucks. I get it. Representatives on the full body of the despot. That's, but back to, here's my question. So we're talking about simulation. We're talking about signification. We're talking about the problem being this moving away from desiring machines. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Here's another word that I've come across in other writing and other thinking and other, people to describe a similar movement: abstraction. Abstracting from the substance, the stuff, God, the desiring machines, whatever. Abstraction. So here's my question. Is simulation and signification, is this like, would it be fair to say that this is like a system of abstraction? Or that's what's going on? Is it abstracting? And then further, do they oppose abstraction? Are they opposed to abstraction and trying to take away some of the abstraction, trying to limit abstraction, trying to make stuff less abstract, trying to make analysis and life less abstract? Is that their mission here? Is that part of their mission here? That's my basic question.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I think, okay, so I was typing this, but I didn't quite get it. But in the sense of, okay, this simulation stuff, or the whole despotic overcoding thing, and this appropriation and production of the real by a quasi-cause. You know, this stuff is strange, definitely. And you know, what's going on with that? So I think, okay, one of the big things, and this is kind of true of, I think Deleuze kind of in all his philosophy, is this idea that the abstract still has real effects. So you can have something be abstract, or even you can think of it also in a more derogatory way. That's not really the word I'm looking for, but more so I'm thinking Spinoza, like inadequate ideas. You can have really bad inadequate ideas where you confuse causes and effects, but it doesn't mean they're just totally just nothingness, a void within a void. They still have these real effects, and I think that's one of the big things that they're getting at. So I think especially with this book, and I think one of the things that why this is challenging for someone, especially someone I think approaching this from a Lacanian point of view, where you've got this impossible real. Instead, they're approaching this from a Spinoza's point of view, where in a sense, everything is real. It's just a question of, in what sense is it real? And so it's kind of like all these things are, you know, doing something, they're affecting something, but exactly in what manner and how does that compare to, you know, how it's presenting itself and how it's conceived? Does the idea actually match itself? It's presenting itself as a cause of something. Is it really the cause of the thing that it's presenting itself as? I think the simulation would be something where it's simply it's not doing what it presents itself to be, even though it is still doing something. And I think you can think of it as abstraction, as long as you don't think of it that means it's just completely not real, because everything is real for them. So I think another way of thinking of this that at least helps me, maybe because maybe slightly insane or something, is when they're talking about schizophrenia and the way that the schizo, think about this, you're deep into psychosis. From that perspective, everything is real. Think about it, like you would lack a kind of reflexive ability to be like, oh, is that right? I don't know. Like this thing right here, is that real? Is that not? There's almost like an intensity that's so overwhelming that there's no question that it's real in some aspect, even if it's not real. Even if it is just from one perspective, it's a total hallucination, in the sense that nobody else sees, you know, Saddam Hussein coming in your room or whatever, playing fiddle, whatever, I don't know, just make something up. But still, the fact that that is happening and that you're experiencing that, there's some kind of real imminent effect going on there. And that's, I think, what they're getting at. That's kind of like the mode that they're approaching things from. And now they're trying to figure out, okay, but what exactly is going on here, though? We know these things are real, they have these real effects, but yeah, how does it happen? So yeah, the overcoding stuff. Okay, so I think one way of thinking of, okay, the despotic overcoding, what is going on there? So it's not just another kind of coding, it is something really actually distinct from the coding. So if you think of, I think, but it takes the kind of what's going on with the territorial machine, which is about, you know, these intense relations with the earth and with affiliation and alliance and whatnot on that level, that it kind of takes over that and sort of superimposes these new relations on that, but that's still operating through a kind of representational kind of presentation. And I think that is what is simulation. But it's not just a kind of representation in a totally abstract way. It's still doing something. And the fact that, you know, obviously a king or monarch or whatever still obviously has capacity to do something, but the king isn't actually, you know, the father of everyone and whatnot, is not really in direct affiliation with the deity, or all these kind of, you know, superstitious things, that kind of stuff that Spinoza did not like and whatnot. But so I think if you read Thomas Hobbes, you get a lot of these kind of strange quasi-cause things that sound, so he's interesting because he's kind of in between periods. So he's trying to do something with a kind of despotic kind of imperial machine kind of thing. This the body politic of the Leviathan, the sovereign. It's definitely I think it's a good fit for this kind of imperial barbarian machine that they're talking about, but at the same time it's still kind of also is showing the way towards these or really what they call what those Guattari call the democratic wrapping of the despotic signifier, which is pretty interesting, because Hobbes presents this as a contract, you know, that, oh yeah, this is all, it's all good. People, you know, through reason willingly, contractually, you know, give away their rights so that they don't live in, you know, a war of all against all. And they create this artificial person, the sovereign, and the sovereign that has all the power. So yeah, I think if you look at some of the stuff that Hobbes kind of gets into and the way that the sovereign operates, it's almost like he doesn't mind kind of admitting that it's indeed like an artificial person that he's creating, this sovereign. And you know, what the hell's going on with this contract? There's no fucking contract. Nobody's signing anything. I think this is an example of kind of simulation kind of thing going on there. Except that's probably too just theoretical and, dare I say, ideological, because I think really what they're getting at is kind of like actual political formations, that they also operate through this kind of simulation where, you know, they're constructing all these kind of mythical, quasi-causal body politics that usually will take some kind of like mythical representation from the earth, you know, as like from these previous kind of ways of symbolizing political power, and instead presenting their own kind of image on that, and but doing that in a way where they're actually having that kind of dispersive effect. So if you think of so Foucault, how he talks about power is, you know, it's something that is dispersed throughout a social field, although it's not just completely kind of local mechanical things, but it's not localized, but it does operate through various local operations, but at the same time it's also still dispersed, and it's not kind of contained within just one institution here or this institution or, you know, that group of people. It's not a property, it's instead a kind of strategy, it's an action, it's a praxis. And I think that's kind of also this kind of real element that is operating through, through these social formations, also for Deleuze and Guattari. But also, yeah, you've got these elements of, so in Foucault, Discipline and Punish, he talks about these, so you have these tortured people. Somebody tries to, kill the king or does something bad enough. There's all these kind of symbolic elements that go along with how they're punished. And if you see, and they, Damien the Regicide, which is a great, the opening page of Discipline and Punish is fantastic. And the way that is presented, it has these symbolic kind of meanings that go along, but it's not just a kind of a theoretical thing. It's instead, it's operating on multiple levels, I think. But it refers back to the way that the king tries to present himself as being this kind of, I'm someone in direct affiliation with the deity, divine right of kings. I'm almost all powerful. If you break the law, that's an attack against my body. So therefore, I'm going to attack yours. And so I think that's kind of what they mean by these various ideas of simulation, overcoding. That really has to do with kind of the way they will take these sort of mobile blocks of debt and alliance and affiliation from the previous and these rituals and whatnot. And so they become, forms of torture and punishment in the Barbarian Imperial. I think that's an example of something like an overcoding. Hopefully that helps.
I know Deleuze uses the word virtual. Would this be like a representation of that, or an example of that, like the abstractions that Hunter was bringing up?
Yeah, I think you can think of the virtual as either real potentiality or real abstraction. You can think of it either that way, and it's easy to kind of overthink what it means because it's a strange thing, this real virtuality. But I think if you think of it as a kind of the reality of this abstraction, that is what's going on. Yeah.
The word reification also comes to mind.
Yeah, so one thing that is interesting is that I think they say this in Anti-Oedipus, but they kind of repeat it frequently in 1,000 Plateaus. They usually will critique people for being, in some sense, too abstract, and in other cases, they're not abstract enough, and that they're still thinking in terms of, they're taking empirical things, and they're kind of projecting that into the transcendental, or you think of as, like the universal, the eternal, whatnot, and using that usually to justify some kind of established power, some kind of, current state of affair. Think of it as, okay, the king, you think of it that way. It would be something like taking, okay, all social power has to come, has to operate through a monarchy, clearly, otherwise you have chaos. This was kind of common way of thinking about things, because they're taking the empirical state of things at that time, the established powers, and thinking that that is actually a kind of like transcendental structure that needs to be just like that, or otherwise you don't have any kind of an empirical thing. But they're justifying that, and I think that is a kind of reification. I'm not sure exactly. They have so at least in difference repetition, he calls it tracing, I believe, that this idea of empirical tracing, and he's kind of hammers that point home. But yeah, I think there is something like a kind of, so one thing is they do try to somewhat avoid some of these kind of classical Marxist terms, which doesn't mean that they're not kind of playing around with the same concepts, you know, like alienation. That's probably just too close to Hegel. That's probably why they don't use that. You know, yeah. And reification, I think, I can't remember them actually kind of referring to that, you know. I think that's one of the things where they just kind of like use their own concepts instead, because it's pretty close to kind of what they mean by stratification in 1,000 Plateaus, which I'm not, what do they even really call it in Anti-Oedipus? It's the idea of kind of like, you know, reification, fixity of some type. Not sure exactly what they refer to it here. I don't know. So I just finished reading 1,000 Plateaus last week, so maybe that's why my mind is very much absorbed in that. I can't even think in terms of Anti-Oedipus very clearly. Yeah, the triangulation, I think that is a little more specific. Just dropped my phone. Is that triangulation? I don't know. Probably not. Yeah, the triangulation, that has to do with the whole, you know, I don't, that's a tough one. It's the whole, well, not just mommy, daddy, me, but also how that works in terms of, well, he talks about as the, you know, you have the despotic signifier that can like detaches. It's like the 3+1 or 4+1 thing. Actually, that's a good question. So you know, now that I think about it, I really, what the fuck is triangulation? What is that? Yeah, it's gonna, who knows? But I think that is, I will say that I think that is somewhat limited, or it's kind of, it's specific, where they need something more, a more kind of a general idea. But yeah.
Yeah, the triangulation seems more psychoanalytic rather than like for the philosophical side of it.
Yeah, so I think it's really, Hunter, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't Lacan kind of like specifically use, I don't know if it's like, so that, you know, there's the 3 registers and Lacan, and I think doesn't he analyze things like specifically like thinking in terms of like triangulating things? I know it's got to be a reference to like this idea of a kind of like the structural form of psychoanalysis. I don't know. Now that I think about it, I'm not very clear on this idea. Probably because it is some kind of Lacanian thing.
Well, I could just, I mean, my brief thing is on that is just, I mean, it's on one hand, the triadic conception of the registers of experience, right? I mean, the real, symbolic, and imaginary, but the big thing that I think that gives the triangulation, the triangular element, it's if you're going to critique triangles, I think the reason that this is a legitimate way to kind of like a legitimate avenue to critique psychoanalysis really is basically for Lacan, 3 is just sort of a natural outcome. 3-ness, triangularity. I'll give you an example. You have one thing. You start with 1. You start with a 1. That 1, according to Lacan's system, fails to be fully what it is, so to speak. It fails at presenting itself as it purportedly is. It fails at adhering to its empirical or symbolic investments and determinations. There's something about it that's overdetermined, underdetermined. There's an insufficiency or an overqualification. There's some sort of disjointedness in a thing by itself, a 1. So there's the 1, and then in order to have any sort of intelligible analysis of one thing, you have to include into that analysis reference to its failure to be what you're describing it as being in your analysis. You know, masculinity or something, you know, or whatever, right? Or the mother, the father, whatever. There's this, and maybe Hegel did kind of like 3s as well. But so you have this thing, the 1. It fails to be as you can even possibly describe it. And so you have to go outside of that 1 to kind of bracket it and make reference to the incompleteness of your analysis in order to complete the analysis by swallowing the incompleteness. In order to have a complete analysis, you have to swallow the incompleteness and make reference to something outside the allegedly complete 1. That's the 2. So the 2 is not, for Lacan, 2 is not more than 1. 2 is less than 1 for Lacan, because 2 is the 1 and its constitutive limitations, failures, finitudes, inabilities, inhibitions, the void. That's what Zizek calls it. Zizek calls it the void of its incompleteness. So you have the thing and this void. And a real solid capital T2 for Lacan does not happen. Two entities in tension or harmony, yin, yang, red, blue, peanut butter jelly, men and woman, just being different or some bullshit pseudo folk psychology analysis. Doesn't happen. And in fact, he says 2 is the illusion of a sexual relationship. That's it. He has a lot of weird quotes that barely make sense. Oh, don't worry, Nevitt. It's okay. I'm just doing this as always, but it'll be.
So either Eric or Hunter will have to terminate the session.
And just to clarify, I just hit leave and it's fine, right? I just hit.
Yeah, I guess if both you and Eric leave, I think it will automatically just cut the session off. So yeah.
In fact, yeah, you go ahead.
I apologize, but we've got stuff we got to go do, wife and such. Bye-bye.
Yeah, no problem. Bye. Never. See ya. Love you. Bye. All right. I'm probably gonna do something. So I mean, we're like 10 minutes away from the freaking end time. So actually, I'm not gonna the end times. I'm just gonna make another comment on this. I'm just gonna say so. Okay, so you have the 1 which fails, and then you have. Basically, if I could put this in a different way, you have the 1 and its self, the thing it's expected to be versus what it is. Basically, to put this in layman, to try and put this to myself, like in simple terms, you have the thing and its self. the thing in itself, these two poles, there's a gap between them, right? That gap, there's some way to describe the gap. There's some symbol I can attach to that gap. There's some way I can describe the difference between the thing and itself. And that name for that gap is the second thing. That's femininity, basically. And again, totally divorced from like monster trucks and purses. Like it's not feminine, masculine, like as we are thinking. But the gap between masculinity and itself produces the second term. That gap, the name for that gap, femininity. Then you've got two terms, femininity and masculinity. Masculinity is the initial term, femininity as the sign or signifier for the incompleteness of masculinity. Femininity is not just less or more than masculinity. The woman is not just more than man, it is more itself. It is this symbol of gapness, of moreness, of it. To be woman is to be more, you know, and this is the very minimal value that I found in Lars von Trier's terrible duality of films, or diptych of films, Nymphomaniac. What a horrible piece of shit waste of my life that I spent watching 6 hours of that fucking hogwash cinema. One part of it was interesting though, where a woman said, all I'm guilty of is asking more colors of the sunset. That's kind of nice. All of the rest of it, or basically the rest of it, was pig shit. It's a quote Deleuze. It's quoting somebody else. But Antichrist is cool. I liked all the bolts and the machines and the body and like Willem Dafoe's, you know, whole business being out on camera. It's super cool. That's a cool movie. But whatever. So you have masculinity has a gap between itself and itself. That gap is called something. That's called femininity. But then you have these two terms, right? There logically would be a gap between the two. You had a gap between the thing and itself, and then this other thing came in, right, as the name for that gap. Well, now you've got, okay, so you've got this thing. Basically, really, you've got these two things that are not quite themselves, the divided subjects. One of them being just a name for the gap of the other one. You see what I'm saying? See the kind of illustration I'm doing? I feel like I'm being like Mary Klein or whatever, where I'm putting a train inside of a little hole and telling you that it's mommy and daddy and whatever. You know what I'm saying? I'm making all these obscene sexual references. But you have the two, and then the third thing is the name for the gap between those two. Right? Yeah, this is the three, the schematizing, yes. The graph of desire is like this weird hoop that I don't really understand completely yet. But that's three. That's why three always happens. One thing for Lacan is three things. It's the thing, the signifier for the separation between the thing and itself, and then the signifier for the separation between the thing and the signifier for the separation between the thing and itself. So basically you have M, and then there's a gap between M, and that gap is F, femininity. Then there's a gap between M and F, and that gap between M and F is plus. So the three, Lacan would probably say there are three sexualities, M and F and plus. That's the three. And you have an experience. Your experience has a gap between itself and itself, the symbolic aspect and the imaginary aspect, or not even really. It's the gap between in the realm of the imaginary immediate experience. Let's bring this into imaginary. In the immediate, so yeah, there's a logical impossibility of a solid one, basically. And so let's say an experience, I have an imaginative experience, I'm imagistically operating and relating to my world and whatever, right? But there's this, he would say that there's this gap between my experience and my experience of my experience. That gap is symbols. That's symbolism. That's symbols. So you have the gap between my experience and my experience of my experience producing symbols. Now there's a gap between my experience, my imaginary experience, and symbols. So you got one, now you got two, and then what's the difference between imagination and symbols? The real. Oh fuck, the thing that isn't, it's not in my direct experience, and it's not in my symbols neither. There's some sort of gap. What are they missing? They can't, are they covering the whole world? Does imagination and symbology cover all the possibilities of experience or reality? No. So what do we call that? We call that the real. You have imaginary, symbolic, and real. Masculine, feminine, and plus. Pee-pee, poo-poo, toilet. I don't know what. Like, you know what I'm saying? The three. That's why I think Lacan does very much believe in three, in triangle. And if you're going to critique triangles, I'm saying it's a good way to get into critiquing Lacan. That's my point.
I like three has been kind of a recurring thing. I don't know why. I've just like I like three too. But the way I've thought about it is like literally, so you have like a bottle, right? And this all comes from this idea of like, first of all, having something. Oh, okay, Keenan. Then you won't understand this. Yeah. It like if you're first of all, I think Jung was too. If you have a bottle, you necessarily need to know what is not the bottle. Like literally everything that is not a bottle. Otherwise, like this bottle means nothing, right? Like, and then like if you have the bottle, then you have the not bottle, then you have both. That's like the basis of like understanding all within the concept of one, right? Because like I'm thinking about it in Kant. Like Kant has the idea of like the analytical judgment, where it's like if you make a judgment of something, there are things that are presupposed in that judgment itself that you can't like have the judgment without the without its predicates, right? So like if you have an idea of one, that presupposes two, because whatever is one, you have to have everything that's not that, or else one, you wouldn't be able to distinguish anything, like a one of anything. You wouldn't be able to distinguish the bottle from anything else. And then with that, with those two things, like you have one and nothing else, that combination, I guess in the Hegelian sense, it would be like that antithesis or contradiction would be the three, the notion, I guess, if you will, that you can kind of expand from there. And that's like the idea of, that's how I understood like how Hegel began to grasp knowledge of anything, right? Those are like the movements that are interpreted from, you know, sense certainty and onward.
Yeah, and I just as a thing in total agreement with what you're saying, and as my like sticky note addendum thought is, yeah, Hegel and Lacan, I think, but Hegel in much less clear terms, does this move from 1 to 2 to 3 and all these, you know, basically Hegel's system to me is logic, nature, and spirit. You know, he starts with logic, then nature, spirit, being, nothing, becoming, right? Whatever. I mean, I'm not a big fan of saying being, nothing, becoming, but the logic, nature, spirit, sure. You move from 1 to 3, being, nothing, becoming, you know, whatever. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So fucking, it makes me, I literally like feel like somebody's angry at me as I say it. But if we can just say that that's in some way a way to describe something like what he's doing, the move from 1 to 2 to 3 is not grounded in like oh, we can go beyond 1 and get to 2. Oh, well, fuck, wait. Not oh fuck, oh yes, now we've got 3. Oh, you know, there's just this fucking coming all the time, you know, this sort of analytic like, oh, I finally got the fucking thing, you know. It's a series of failures. It's okay, we've got 1. Oh shit, oh god, it's broken. Oh fuck, it's 2. I don't mean 1. I take back what I said. It's not 1, it's 2, okay? And then somebody says, what do you mean 2? What do you mean by 2? Who told you it was 2? Some 3? And it's like, oh, I know it's 2 because Okay, maybe I don't. Well, okay. Well then, okay, just for me to say that it's two, there's got to be some fucking fuck you. There's got to be something, okay? So it's going to be three, okay? So we're good. Fine, fine. So maybe I don't have one and it broke into two and my bad, okay? But I know that at least that it's two because I've got this three, okay? Just please, just no more. Just no more. No more. And this that my point is, my illustration of this stupid bumbling persona is that the idea of the movement, the movement of the concept, like when Lacan says language is the movement of the signifier. Yeah, I start doing that. I'm like a lecturer and I just start fucking yeah, oh god. I'm like self-directed hatred. It's like because Lacan says language is the movement of the signifier, and Hegel would say that, you know, dialectics is the movement of the concepts. They move in a series of failures, gaps, limitations, breaks, collapses, you know, bad, thumbs down, you know, ooh, castration, you know what I'm saying? That is the thing. I think Hegel would word it as saying all first propositions are false on the virtue of their being first propositions. And Lacan would probably say, in order to say that, Lacan would phrase it differently. He would say, man is the castrated lover and the woman is the absolute other. You know, he'd say something like that, which is totally weird and sexy and stuff, you know, and not as formal. But when Lacan talks about symbolic castration, it's the failure, the constant oopsie, the oopie, you know, I can't live up to my form. I'm not the form and the content. They don't kiss. They know. Or I guess they do kiss, but whatever. And so, yeah, Lacan is talking about castration. Hegel is talking about the failure of the predicate. But both, in a sense, are getting at this thing, primordial repression. Something is primordially repressed, lost, missing. Energy transference. We lose 10%. Something is fucking missing. Something is always missing. We fell from Eden. We're fallen. We're castrated. We're symbolic. We are cursed, doomed to language. And I think Hegel, I mean, he's kind of maybe more of an asshole, but weirdly more optimistic, maybe. Lacan, total asshole still, maybe a little bit more, had a little bit more swag, a little bit more, he was a little more chill. He was, you know, kind of cooler, but more pessimist. That's
I have to interrupt and say, have you seen the video where Lacan is talking about death?
You mean
Okay,
Lacan Parlay, where he gets interrupted by that revolutionary student or whatever?
No. Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll have to look at that. But if you just go to YouTube and type Lacan death, like you'll see it. It's a short video, and he sounds like a Baptist preacher. It's like full of force and the force of signification. I don't know, but I definitely recommend watching that. It's just like, holy shit. I don't know, very compelling speaker, but there's like even like his sense of timing, like dramatic timing. He's just like, death, like good thing. Oh, we need death. Yeah. I recommend it. It's probably one of the best videos on YouTube, really.
Okay, so now I'm going to say this. All right, everybody, I love you, and we all love each other, and we love theorizing and reading and talking about reading, and we also love the thing outside of the reading, which is our stupid little lives that seem to justify our actual enterprises here. First off, I wanted to say that clip, Lacan on Death, I found it, and it's a 1 minute and 50-second clip from the thing I just linked, which is Lacan Parlait. Lacan Parlait is by Francois Wolff. It's a 1 hour documentary. It's just footage of Lacan speaking in, I think, 1952. And in that, he talks about death, and he talks about remorse, and he talks about all these things. His tie, he talks a lot about his tie. And then at
Yeah,
one
he's got
point,
a notable tie that he's wearing. Yeah, he had some swag, definitely. He was
I think, I mean, yeah, it's still Sylvia Bataille.
Oh yeah, his wife or Bataille's not sure what phrase to use. Old or something.
Old lady.
I did not sleep much. Yeah.
I think it's, but so, and then in the middle of that, a guy comes in, some young guy, and like splashes paint on Lacan in the middle of the filming of the seminar. And then Lacan, and then a bunch of, I mean, they're all a bunch of soy boys like me. So they're all like, hey buddy, what are you, and so is he. So they're like, hey buddy, what do they do? And they're all kind of like getting around him as if they're gonna do anything. But like this guy, like they're not gonna, they're like seminar students. They're not gonna do anything. But they're like, we're gonna get him out of here. And then Lacan's like, wait, hold on. Let me, wait, gentlemen. And he's like wiping his glasses, and then he's like, let's talk about this. And he says, he asks this guy, like, would you be willing to sit here at this table and talk with me in front of these students? And then they start talking, and then he's like, so, what did you want? What did you come here why'd you do this? What were you looking for? And he said, I want revolution. What do you mean revolution? He's like, pure revolution, absolute revolution from charlatans like you and all the oppressive apparatuses of society that keep me and others like me down and that maintain the status quo. And then Lacan literally is like, when was one of the first times you can recall where you wanted something like this revolution? And he's like in the middle, and this guy is like earnestly like, okay,
triangulated.
Like, yeah. Oh, get triangulated, bitch. Like, but then it gets to the point where it's all in French, but there's English subtitles. Yeah. There's English subtitles on every version, and it's on YouTube. But then he's like, would you mind perhaps, I have some words to say in response to your thoughts. Would you mind perhaps sitting down with the audience for a moment while I speak on this? And the guy's like, okay. And then he just sits down. And then I think he like gets up one more time, splashes a little bit more paint on Lacan, and then some people are like, all right, you're fucking out of here, pal. Like, that's enough. You gotta quit it. And Lacan's like, okay. And then being all as swagged out as we described, he lights a cigar while he's covered in like paint on his arms and face. And he's like, I fucking showed that guy, But yeah, okay. So that's it. Lacan parlay, really good. That's my thing about Lacan and triangulation and Hegel and triangles and Sur threes. Okay, blah, blah, blah. I have some more intense questions to mount about Anti-Oedipus or about just, but I'm going to put that in the Discord chat. I decided actually like later, because on one hand, I want to, sorry, I'm not going to describe in detail what I'm about to do, in fact, but I'm about to cut loose, and I want to do that now. I want to get rid of the hard part of the day. And then do that. What did you link to? Is this the death thing?
No, it's the I think it's Pala.
Oh, Pala. Lacan Pala. Pala.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Well, there's also, it's on. Yeah, it is. It's like Jacques Lacan giving a lecture at the Catholic University. Yeah, Lacan Pala. Well, I don't know how to speak French. All right. Anyway, so now that I've stopped, I need to tell my friend. Okay, now I've gotten all that out.